Have you ever looked at someone you love and wondered if the whole world could be right while only you believed they were innocent? What if your husband was only days away from execution? Every piece of evidence pointed to his guilt. The media had already condemned him, and even his own family begged you to stop fighting. Would you walk away? Or would you risk everything to prove that the man you married wasn't the monster everyone believed he was? And what if the one memory that could save his life wasn't hidden in a courtroom file, but buried deep inside your own heart? Welcome back to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story reminds us that love isn't measured by the easy days. It is revealed in the moments that demand impossible choices. If you're new here and you enjoy emotional stories filled with powerful life lessons, unforgettable twists and inspiring endings, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Today's story is unlike anything you've heard before. It's a story about a wife who refused to abandon the man the world had already sentenced to die. A story about memories that lied, silence that nearly destroyed a marriage, and a truth so powerful that when it was finally revealed, an entire courtroom forgot to breathe. By the end of this story, you'll understand why she saved her husband from death row, and why even the judge stood up for her. Now, let's begin. Vanessa Brooks stared at the pale ring it left inside her favorite cream-colored mug, sitting untouched on the kitchen counter, exactly where she'd placed it 23 minutes earlier. She hadn't meant to forget about it. She never did. It was simply a habit she'd developed over the years. Start the coffee, become lost in thought, then remember it only after it was no longer worth drinking. She sighed, wrapped both hands around the mug anyway, and looked through the window above the sink. Outside, the early October morning in Asheville, North Carolina, was quiet. A soft mist hovered over the neighborhood, blurring the maple trees that lined the street. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice before silence returned. It should have been peaceful. Instead, the silence reminded her of another morning, another kitchen, another cup of coffee, another life. Without thinking, she reached for the old ceramic sugar bowl sitting beside the coffee maker. There was no sugar inside anymore. She had emptied it months ago but never found the heart to replace it. Daniel had bought it during their first year of marriage. "It's ugly," she'd laughed when he'd carried it into their apartment, proudly holding the lopsided pottery as though it belonged in an art gallery. "It's handmade," he'd replied with mock offense. "There's a difference. It looks like someone dropped it before glazing it. They gave it character." "No," she'd teased. "Gravity gave it character." He'd laughed so hard he'd nearly dropped it for real. The memory arrived so vividly that Vanessa almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she traced the small crack running down one side of the bowl. Some things survived because nobody expected them to. Others broke because everyone assumed they couldn't. A loud knock on the front door pulled her back to the present. She blinked, surprised. Nobody visited this early. Another knock. More urgent this time. Vanessa opened the door to find Mrs. Evelyn Carter from next door standing on the porch with a foil-covered casserole dish balanced carefully in both hands. "I made too much lasagna," the elderly woman said. Vanessa knew immediately that it wasn't true. Mrs. Carter lived alone. She never made too much of anything. "You didn't have to." "I know," the older woman smiled gently. "But you haven't been eating properly." Vanessa forced a polite smile. "I'm fine." Mrs. Carter looked at her for several seconds. "No, sweetheart." The words weren't accusing. They were simply honest. Vanessa stepped aside. "You may as well come in." Mrs. Carter entered without another word. She placed the casserole on the counter before glancing around the kitchen. "It's still exactly the way he left it." Vanessa looked away. "I know." Neither woman spoke for nearly a minute. Silence had become easier than explaining grief. Finally, Mrs. Carter rested one wrinkled hand over Vanessa's. "You don't have to preserve every memory." Vanessa swallowed. "If I move anything." Her voice cracked. "It feels like admitting he's never coming home." Mrs. Carter squeezed her hand. "Or maybe it means making room for hope." Hope. The word had become dangerous. Hope had kept her awake for nearly 3 years. Hope had emptied her savings. Hope had carried her across hundreds of prison visiting rooms. Hope had survived more court hearings than she could count. Hope had become exhausting. Yet somehow, she couldn't let it die. Because Daniel was still alive. For now. 268 miles away. Daniel Brooks folded his prison blanket with mechanical precision before sitting on the edge of the narrow metal bed bolted to the concrete floor. Death row had a way of making routines feel sacred. Every morning happened exactly the same. Wake up, fold blanket, wash face, count footsteps between the bed and the bars, read, think, wait, mostly wait. The waiting was worse than anything else. His cell measured barely enough for a bed, toilet, sink, and small desk. He'd memorized every crack in the concrete, Every scratch on the steel door. Every sound echoing through the corridor. Footsteps. Keys. Voices. Silence. Repeat. A correctional officer stopped outside his cell. Mail. Daniel looked up. The officer slid a single envelope through the slot. No return address. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Vanessa. His fingers lingered on the envelope before opening it. She never wrote about the case anymore. Never about appeals. Never about lawyers. Instead, she wrote about ordinary things. The neighbors' roses. The weather. A stray cat that had started sleeping on their porch. The coffee maker finally breaking. The little things. Things that reminded him the world still existed beyond concrete walls. He unfolded the letter carefully. Dear Daniel, the maple tree outside our bedroom has finally turned red. You always said autumn made the neighborhood look like someone had spilled paint across the mountains. You were right. Mrs. Carter insists I'm too thin. She's probably right too. I tried fixing the porch light yesterday. I failed. You'd have laughed. I still can't believe you convinced me changing a light bulb required reading the instruction manual. I'm beginning to think you only wanted an excuse to watch me struggle. If you did, it worked. I'm writing this while drinking another cup of coffee that's already gone cold. Some habits refuse to change. Just like some promises don't. I promised I'd keep coming. I meant it, no matter how long it takes. Love always, Vanessa. Daniel closed his eyes, not because he was crying, because he refused to. There wasn't enough privacy left in prison for tears. Instead, he folded the letter with the same care she'd used writing it. His cellmate from years earlier had once said something he'd never forgotten. The hardest part isn't losing your freedom. It's wondering whether someone out there still remembers who you were before this place decided who you are. Daniel no longer wondered. Vanessa remembered, even when he wished she wouldn't. Back in Asheville, Vanessa climbed the narrow staircase to the spare bedroom. Everyone else still called it Daniel's office. She hadn't corrected them. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar. His shelves remained exactly as he'd organized them. History books, mystery novels, travel guides they'd promised to use someday. She reached into the bottom drawer of his desk. Hidden beneath neatly stacked notebooks sat a weathered leather journal. She hadn't opened it in over a year. Slowly, she lifted the cover. Inside, tucked between two pages, was an old photograph. Two young people, standing beside a lake, laughing, not looking at the camera, looking only at each other. She smiled, then noticed something she'd somehow missed every previous time she'd seen the picture. In the background, almost too small to notice, someone else stood beneath the trees, watching them. Her smile faded. She leaned closer. The figure was blurred, almost impossible to identify. Yet something about it unsettled her. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Not fear, recognition, like remembering a dream she'd convinced herself she'd forgotten. For the first time in months, a memory she'd buried long ago began quietly knocking on the door of her mind. And she had no idea. It was the memory that would one day decide whether her husband lived or died. Vanessa barely slept that night. The photograph lay on her bedside table, its corners worn smooth from years of being tucked inside Daniel's leather journal. She had looked at it so many times during their marriage that she could have described every detail without holding it in her hands. Or so she had believed. Now she couldn't stop staring at the blurred figure beneath the trees. It was strange how the mind worked. You could remember someone's laughter from 20 years ago, but forget what they wore yesterday. You could replay an argument word for word, while forgetting why it started. And sometimes, you could look at the same photograph 100 times before seeing something that had always been there. Vanessa turned off the bedside lamp. Darkness filled the room. Yet instead of sleeping, she found herself drifting backward. Not to the trial, not to the prison, but to a rainy afternoon almost 9 years earlier. She had met Daniel Brooks in the least romantic place imaginable, the county library. Vanessa wasn't there to browse. She was hiding. Her office building had lost power during a thunderstorm, and the library across the street had become a temporary refuge while she waited for the rain to ease. She sat near the history section, pretending to read a novel she had no intention of borrowing. Across the aisle, a man balanced 3 thick history books against his chest while trying to answer his ringing phone. It ended exactly the way common sense predicted. The books slipped. One struck the floor with a loud thud. Another bounced into the next aisle. The third landed directly at Vanessa's feet. She picked it up before he could. "I think your civil war just lost another battle," she said. The man looked at her for a moment before laughing. Not politely, not awkwardly, genuinely. "I knew carrying all 3 was overconfident." "You think?" "I was hoping confidence counted as upper body strength." "It doesn't. So I've learned." He accepted the book from her with an embarrassed smile. "I'm Daniel. Vanessa, he glanced at the novel in her lap. You've been on the same page for 20 minutes. She blinked. You noticed? I notice people who pretend to read. She narrowed her eyes. Is that your hobby? No. He smiled. I restore old furniture. She laughed. So why were you watching me? I wasn't. You just admitted you were. I admitted I noticed. That's different? For a history nerd. He paused dramatically. Details matter. She shook her head. You really are a history nerd. The worst kind. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't fate announcing itself with dramatic music. It was simply easy. Conversation flowed without effort. Silence didn't feel uncomfortable. Neither of them tried to impress the other. By the time the rain stopped, they had spent nearly 2 hours talking. When Daniel finally asked if she'd like dinner sometime, Vanessa surprised herself by saying yes, before he had even finished the question. 3 months later. You know, Vanessa said while helping him sand an antique rocking chair. Most women expect flowers. Daniel looked up. I brought sandpaper. You did. I feel like I misread the situation. She smiled. I prefer this. You prefer breathing sawdust. I prefer honesty. He leaned against the workbench. My father used to say, furniture tells the truth. Furniture? If someone repairs it carefully, you know they loved it. She brushed wood dust from her hands. And if they replace it? They were afraid it couldn't be fixed. She looked at the old rocking chair. It has a lot of cracks. So do people. He smiled softly. That doesn't mean you throw them away. Those words would stay with her for years, long after she forgot where they had been spoken. Back in the present, Vanessa opened her eyes. The bedroom ceiling slowly came into focus. 6:30 in the morning. She hadn't realized she'd fallen asleep. The dream lingered. Not because of the library, not because of the rain, because of something Daniel had said. People have cracks. That doesn't mean you throw them away. She whispered the words aloud. They don't. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The caller ID read, Marcus Ellis, Daniel's attorney. She answered immediately. Marcus? I hope I didn't wake you. I was already awake. There was a pause. I've been reviewing the state's timeline again. Vanessa sat upright. And? I'm still not convinced. Her heart quickened. You found something? I found a question. She frowned. What kind of question? The kind that should have been asked 3 years ago. Marcus sighed heavily. Why did Daniel change his statement? Vanessa froze. He didn't. He absolutely did. No. I've got both transcripts in front of me. Vanessa's stomach tightened. The first interview says he left the warehouse at 8:45. Yes. The second says just after 9. She blinked. I never noticed. Neither did the jury. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Marcus spoke again. I don't think he lied. What do you think? I think someone convinced him his own memory was wrong. The words settled heavily inside her. Could that happen? Could someone be so certain that they stopped trusting themselves? 300 miles away. Daniel sat alone inside the prison visitation room. The walls were painted a tired shade of grey. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He had visited this room more than 100 times. Each visit ended the same way. A guard announcing time. A final hug. Another goodbye. He hated goodbyes, especially with Vanessa. When she entered the room, she smiled immediately. He smiled back. Neither mentioned how tired the other looked. Neither mentioned the growing streaks of grey appearing in both their hair. Instead, she sat down. I saw the photograph. Daniel frowned. What photograph? The one from Lake Junaluska. Recognition crossed his face. Oh, there was someone else there. He looked confused. What do you mean? In the background. He searched his memory. I don't remember anyone. I didn't either. She slid the picture across the table. Daniel leaned closer. His brow furrowed. I've never noticed that. Neither had I. For nearly a minute, they stared at the blurred figure together. Then Daniel quietly said something unexpected. I'm not sure that's a person. Vanessa looked at him. What else could it be? I don't know. He smiled faintly. Our brains are funny. She nodded. They like patterns. They also invent them. His answer lingered in the air. Neither realized how true those words would become. After the visit, Vanessa drove home through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Autumn leaves drifted across the highway. Normally she found the drive calming. Today, her thoughts refused to settle. Marcus's question echoed endlessly. Why did Daniel change his statement? Daniel had always possessed an excellent memory. He remembered birthdays, phone numbers, license plates, historical dates. He once recalled the exact conversation they'd had on their third date nearly 7 years later. So why would he suddenly become uncertain about the most important night of his life? Unless someone had made him question himself. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The possibility terrified her, not because it proved Daniel was innocent, but because it suggested something even more disturbing. Memory wasn't as reliable as she'd always believed. And if Daniel's memory could be manipulated, what about hers? That evening, Vanessa returned to Daniel's office. The photograph lay beside his journal. She examined it under a brighter lamp. Again, and again. Then something caught her eye. Written faintly on the back, almost erased by time, were 6 words. Sometimes memory protects us from truth. She stared at the handwriting. It wasn't hers. It wasn't Daniel's. A chill traveled down her spine. Who had written it? And, more importantly, why had that photograph been hidden inside Daniel's journal for so many years? Vanessa closed her eyes. Somewhere beneath years of grief, a forgotten memory shifted. Not enough to reveal itself. Just enough to whisper that everything she believed about the past might be incomplete. And for the first time since Daniel's conviction, she wasn't just fighting the evidence. She was beginning to question her own mind. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If the entire world believed someone you loved was guilty, but your heart kept telling you they were innocent, would you keep fighting for them? Or would there come a point when you'd have to let go? Share your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read your thoughts, because there isn't a simple right or wrong answer. And if this story has already touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional journey filled with powerful life lessons. Remember, sometimes the greatest truths aren't hidden in evidence. They're hidden in the memories we never thought to question. Now, let's continue. The note wouldn't leave Vanessa alone. Sometimes memory protects us from truth. She read the 6 words again as dawn spilled pale gold across Daniel's office. The handwriting wasn't familiar, yet it carried the quiet confidence of someone who believed every letter. She turned the photograph over once more. Nothing. No date. No initials. Only those 6 words. She slid open the desk drawer where she'd found the journal, hoping she'd overlooked something the night before. Old receipts, a broken tape measure, spare house keys, and a stack of warranty manuals greeted her. Nothing unusual. She was about to close the drawer when she noticed a folded envelope wedged into the back corner. It had yellowed with age. Her heartbeat quickened. The front simply read, "For Daniel." No stamp. No address. Someone had handed it to him personally. Vanessa hesitated. Opening someone else's letter felt wrong, even after 13 years of marriage, especially after everything they had survived together. But Daniel had always told her the same thing whenever life became complicated. If something can save us, don't leave it hidden because you're trying to be polite. She carefully unfolded the letter. Inside was only a single sheet of paper. The handwriting matched the words on the photograph. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you finally decided to keep the journal instead of throwing it away. Good. Some memories deserve another chance. Don't trust every version of the past your mind offers you. The brain doesn't remember life like a video camera. It rebuilds every memory each time you recall it. Sometimes it fills in missing pieces with what feels true instead of what actually happened. You once told me forgetting would make life easier, maybe. But sometimes remembering correctly is the only thing that sets us free. There was no signature. Vanessa lowered the paper slowly. Who had written it? And why did it sound as though they knew Daniel intimately? She searched the envelope again. Empty. Only silence answered her questions. 3 hours later, Vanessa walked into Marcus Ellis's office carrying both the photograph and the letter. Marcus looked up from a mountain of legal files. You look like you haven't slept. I found something. She handed him the letter. He read it twice, then leaned back in his chair. This isn't evidence. I know, but it matters. It might. Marcus removed his glasses. Do you know who wrote it? No. Does Daniel? I haven't asked him yet. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You should. Vanessa sank into the chair opposite his desk. I keep thinking about what you said yesterday. About memory? She nodded. If someone's memory can change. Marcus finished her sentence. Then eyewitness testimony can change too. She looked at him. Exactly. He reached for a legal pad. Vanessa, do you know how many wrongful convictions involve mistaken eyewitnesses? She shook her head. Far more than most people realize. He paused. The scary part isn't that people lie. It's that they honestly believe what they're saying. The room fell quiet. Marcus continued. Our memories aren't recordings. They're reconstructions. Every time we remember something, our brain rebuilds it. And every rebuild creates the possibility of change. Vanessa stared at the photograph. So people can become completely certain about something that never happened. They can. And that's what frightens me most about Daniel's case. Death Row Correctional Institution. Daniel sat across from the prison psychologist. Dr. Linda Myers had visited once every month for almost 2 years. She wasn't there to determine guilt. She wasn't there to discuss appeals. She simply asked questions. Questions Daniel rarely wanted to answer. What did you dream about last night? He shrugged. I don't remember. You usually do. It wasn't important. She waited. Silence had become one of her most useful tools. Eventually Daniel sighed. I dreamed about my father. What happened? We were repairing a porch swing. Together? He nodded. He kept telling me I was measuring the wood wrong. Were you? I don't know. Dr. Myers scribbled something in her notebook. Do you think the dream was really about the porch swing? No. What do you think it was about? Daniel looked toward the narrow prison window. My father always believed memories were dangerous. She raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? He said people spend so much time looking backward. They forget to live forward. And what do you believe? Daniel smiled faintly. I think forgetting is dangerous too. The psychologist closed her notebook. Daniel. He looked up. When was the last time you thought about the night of the murder? His expression changed immediately. I think about it every day. No, she corrected gently. I asked when you truly remembered it. He frowned. What's the difference? The difference? She folded her hands. Is that repeating a story isn't the same as remembering an event? Her words unsettled him. For years, he had replayed the same sequence in his head. The warehouse, the argument, the drive home, the police, the arrest, the trial. Again, again, again. But suddenly, he wondered whether he was remembering the night, or simply remembering the version he'd repeated 1,000 times. Vanessa stopped at a small diner on the drive home. The waitress greeted her warmly. The usual? Vanessa smiled. You remembered. Honey. The older woman laughed. You've been ordering turkey sandwiches every Thursday for 3 years. Vanessa smiled politely, then paused. Actually, she closed the menu. I've never ordered turkey. The waitress blinked. You always have. No. I always get grilled chicken. The waitress frowned. For years. Vanessa laughed softly. I think you're mixing me up with someone. The waitress looked genuinely confused. I could have sworn. She stopped herself. I'm sorry. It's all right. Vanessa ordered her lunch, but the exchange lingered long after the food arrived. Neither woman had been lying. One of them had simply remembered incorrectly. And the frightening part was how certain they had both sounded. Later that evening, Vanessa drove to Lake Junaluska. She hadn't visited since the photograph had been taken. The lake looked smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply grown older. The wooden dock still stretched into the water. Children still chased ducks along the shoreline. Couples still walked hand in hand beneath the maple trees. She found the exact spot where the photograph had been taken, then turned. There, the trees, the same place where the blurred figure had stood. Her pulse quickened. From this angle, she realized something she'd completely overlooked. The figure hadn't been watching them. The figure had been facing the lake. The perspective in the photograph had fooled her. She had assumed someone was staring at them. In reality, whoever stood beneath those trees might never have noticed them at all. Vanessa laughed quietly to herself. One mistaken assumption. One incorrect angle. One completely different story. How many other memories had she interpreted the wrong way? She closed her eyes. A voice drifted through her thoughts. Not from the present. From years ago. Daniel's voice. Never trust the first story your mind tells you. Her eyes snapped open. He had said that. She was certain. Or, had he? For the first time in her life. Vanessa wasn't sure whether she remembered the past, or merely the version she had told herself over the years. As the evening breeze rippled across the lake, she stood perfectly still, unaware that someone else, someone connected to the forgotten photograph, was watching her from a distance. And unlike the blurred figure years ago, this time they were watching her. Vanessa didn't notice the man standing beneath the towering sycamore tree until she reached her car. He wasn't trying to hide. He simply stood there with both hands tucked into the pockets of a weathered brown jacket, watching the lake as if he'd been there for hours. Late 60s, grey beard, a faded baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He looked more like a retired fisherman than someone with secrets. Vanessa unlocked her car. Just as she reached for the driver's door, the man spoke. "You've been standing where they took that picture." She froze. Slowly she turned. "I'm sorry?" He nodded toward the photograph still clutched in her hand. "The one by the dock." Her heartbeat stumbled. "You know this picture?" "I remember the day." She stared at him. "You were there?" The old man hesitated. "I was." A silence stretched between them. Vanessa stepped closer. "Then you're the person in the background?" He smiled sadly. "I suppose I am." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Vanessa felt as though time itself had slowed. She had spent years searching court documents, police files, witness statements and news articles. Yet the mysterious figure had simply been alive, standing in front of her. "My name's Harold Whitaker," the man said, extending his hand. She shook it automatically. "I'm Vanessa Brooks." "I know who you are." Those words tightened the knot already forming in her stomach. "You do?" "I've followed your husband's case." "Why?" Harold looked back at the lake. "Because every time I saw his face on television." He swallowed. "I remembered that afternoon." Vanessa's voice barely rose above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" His shoulders slumped. "Because I didn't think what I knew mattered." They sat together on a nearby bench overlooking the water. Leaves drifted lazily across the surface of the lake. Harold spoke without looking at her. "My wife used to bring me here every Sunday." He smiled faintly. "She loved watching people more than birds." Vanessa remained silent. "We were sitting right over there." He pointed toward another bench shaded by maple trees. "I remember seeing a young couple laughing. You and Daniel." Vanessa glanced at the photograph. "You remember us?" "I remember happiness." He chuckled softly. "It stands out." She smiled despite herself. "What happened after the picture?" "You two walked toward the parking lot." "And?" "And nothing." His answer confused her. "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He turned toward her. "Nothing happened." Vanessa frowned. "I don't understand." "I've watched reporters describe that day dozens of times. They all made it sound important. It wasn't." She blinked. "It was just a normal afternoon." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "Then why does it matter now?" Harold sighed. "Because people have a habit of turning ordinary memories into extraordinary ones after tragedy." She looked at him carefully. "My wife used to call it reverse storytelling." "Reverse storytelling?" "When something terrible happens. Our minds search backward for warning signs." He smiled sadly. "Eventually we convince ourselves they were there all along." Vanessa thought about the photograph, the blurred figure, the note, the trial. Had everyone, including herself, been searching backward for meaning? Harold reached into his jacket pocket. "I've carried something for years." He unfolded an old newspaper clipping. Daniel's mugshot stared back from the front page. Across the headline read, "Local businessman charged with murder." After his arrest. Vanessa looked up. "Why?" "Because I kept asking myself whether I should call the police." "And why didn't you?" His eyes filled with regret. "Fear." She waited. "I was 71. My wife had Alzheimer's. I spent every day caring for her." He looked ashamed. "I convinced myself someone else must have seen whatever needed seeing. But no one did." Vanessa placed a gentle hand over his. "You aren't responsible for what happened." He laughed quietly. "That's kind of you. But kindness doesn't erase regret." Those words settled heavily between them. Vanessa understood regret. She lived with it every day, regretting arguments that no longer mattered, regretting words left unsaid, regretting believing she had more time. Education, she realized, often came disguised as pain. "Can I ask you something?" Harold said. "Of course." "Do you believe your husband is innocent?" She answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Why?" She expected the question. She didn't expect how difficult it would be to answer. "Because—" She stopped. Was it because of evidence? No. Because of instinct? Not entirely. Finally, she smiled. "Because I've spent 13 years watching who he is." Harold nodded slowly. "Character." She looked at him. "Exactly." He smiled. "My father used to say, a person's reputation is built in public. Their character is built in private." Vanessa repeated the word softly. "The jury only saw his reputation. I knew his character." Meanwhile, at the prison, Daniel received an unexpected visitor. Not Vanessa, not Marcus. A man wearing a dark blue suit introduced himself through the glass partition. "My name is Benjamin Rhodes." Daniel frowned. I don't know you. No. But I knew the victim. Daniel stiffened. What do you want? Benjamin remained calm. I've spent 3 years believing you murdered my brother. Silence. And now? Benjamin took a slow breath. Now. I'm not sure anymore. Daniel stared at him. What changed? I found something. What? Benjamin slid a business card beneath the opening in the glass. Not here. Daniel looked confused. I can't exactly meet you for coffee. A faint smile crossed Benjamin's face. I know. I've already contacted your attorney. Daniel's pulse quickened. What did you find? Benjamin looked directly into his eyes. A witness. Daniel's breath caught. There was another witness? I believe so. Who? Benjamin shook his head. I don't know yet. But someone has been lying. Back in Asheville, Vanessa returned home just after sunset. Mrs. Carter was watering flowers next door. Long day? Vanessa nodded. The longest. The elderly woman smiled. You look different. Different? Hopeful. Vanessa hadn't realized it until that moment. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. She walked inside. The house no longer seemed frozen in time. It felt alive. She climbed the stairs and opened Daniel's journal again. This time she wasn't searching for clues. She was searching for him. Between the pages, she found a folded grocery list, a movie ticket, a pressed maple leaf, tiny reminders that life wasn't built from extraordinary moments. It was built from ordinary ones. The little things became the big things only after time had passed. She smiled through unexpected tears. Love wasn't remembered because of grand gestures. It survived because of forgotten coffee cups, bad jokes, shared silence, and promises quietly kept. Then something slipped from the back cover of the journal. A small cassette tape. She stared at it in surprise. Written across the faded label were 4 handwritten words. Don't record over this. Vanessa frowned. They hadn't owned a cassette player in years. She turned the tape over. On the other side, someone had written a date. October 14th. Her heart skipped. She knew that date. It was exactly 3 days before the murder. And suddenly, the forgotten tape in her trembling hands seemed far more dangerous than any piece of evidence introduced at Daniel's trial. Vanessa hadn't seen a cassette tape in nearly 15 years. She turned it over carefully in her hands, as though it might fall apart if she held it too tightly. The faded label bore only 4 handwritten words, "Don't record over this," and beneath them, October 14th, 3 days before the murder. 3 days before the life she and Daniel had built began to unravel. She placed the tape on Daniel's desk and searched every drawer in the office. Old notebooks, tax records, a broken desk lamp, but no cassette player. She let out a disappointed sigh. Of course. Technology had moved on. Memories hadn't. An hour later, she pulled into the parking lot of a small electronics repair shop, tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. A bell jingled as she stepped inside. The shop smelled of dust, solder, and old vinyl records. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with reading glasses balanced on the tip of his nose. "Morning," he said. "What can I do for you?" Vanessa held up the cassette. "I need to listen to this." He smiled. "Haven't seen one of those in a while. Do you have a player?" "I've got 3. Relief washed over her. But, he added, "old tapes are fragile. If it's important, I'd rather copy it onto a digital file before we play it." Vanessa nodded immediately. "It's very important." He disappeared into a back room. "You'll have to give me an hour." While she waited, Vanessa wandered into the bakery next door. She ordered coffee. It arrived hot. She didn't drink it. Instead, she watched people through the window. A father tying his daughter's shoelace. A young couple laughing over burnt toast. An elderly man reading the newspaper while his wife quietly stole bites from his muffin. Ordinary moments. The kind people rarely remembered until they were gone. She thought about Daniel. If someone had asked her years earlier what she'd miss most if he ever disappeared, she might have answered his smile, his embrace, his voice. She would have been wrong. What she missed most were the things she never realized she noticed. The way he always checked the back door twice before bed. The way he hummed when repairing furniture. The way he automatically reached for her hand while crossing the street, even after years of marriage. Love, she realized, wasn't made of grand moments. It was stitched together from thousands of tiny habits. Lose enough of them, and the silence became unbearable. "Mrs. Brooks?" She looked up. The repairman stood in the doorway, holding a small USB drive. "I think you should hear this." Back at the shop, he plugged headphones into a computer. I cleaned up as much static as I could. Vanessa slipped on the headphones. A hiss filled her ears. Then, Daniel's voice. Clear, warm, alive. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. She hadn't realized how much she'd forgotten the sound of him outside prison walls. Not the careful, restrained voice he used during visits. This was different. This was the Daniel who laughed easily, who wasn't measuring every word, who still believed tomorrow belonged to him. Testing. Testing. A chuckle. If this thing's working. Another voice interrupted. Male, older. You always talk to machines. Daniel laughed. They're better listeners than people. Vanessa frowned. She didn't recognize the second voice. The recording continued. So, the older man said, have you told her? A pause. No. When will you? Daniel exhaled slowly. I'm waiting. For what? The right time. There isn't one. Silence. Then Daniel spoke quietly. I'm afraid. Of Vanessa? No. A longer pause. I'm afraid she'll look at me differently. Vanessa's heart began to pound. What hadn't he told her? The recording crackled. The older man sighed. Daniel. Secrets don't stay buried forever. I know. If she hears it from someone else. I know. So tell her. I will. When? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Finally, after next week. Vanessa gripped the edge of the desk. Next week, 3 days later. The murder happened. Whatever Daniel intended to tell her, he never got the chance. The recording ended abruptly. Vanessa removed the headphones. Her hands trembled. The repairman looked concerned. Bad news? She wasn't sure whether she'd just uncovered hope or another mystery. Across town, Marcus Ellis sat in a conference room with Benjamin Rhodes. The victim's older brother looked exhausted. I've been going through my brother's storage unit. Marcus leaned forward. And? I found appointment books. Benjamin placed 3 notebooks on the table. He kept detailed records. Marcus opened one. Every meeting, every phone call, every lunch, everything neatly documented. Then one page caught his attention. October 14th, 3 p.m. D. Marcus frowned. DB? Benjamin nodded. My brother almost never used initials. Marcus's pulse quickened. Daniel Brooks. Benjamin looked uneasy. I think so. Marcus flipped to the following pages. There were no notes explaining the meeting. Only one sentence written beneath the initials. He deserves to know. Marcus slowly closed the notebook. What did your brother think Daniel deserved to know? Benjamin shook his head. I've spent 3 years asking myself the same question. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone inside his cell. The prison chaplain stopped outside the bars. You've got that look again? Daniel smiled faintly. What look? The one that says your mind's somewhere else. Daniel looked down. I keep trying to remember something. What? The chaplain nodded knowingly. Sometimes memory doesn't return because we chase it. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? When I lose my glasses. The chaplain smiled. I usually find them after I stop looking. Daniel laughed softly. I wish memories worked like that. They sometimes do. That night, Vanessa spread everything across the dining room table. The photograph, the anonymous letter, the journal, the cassette tape, Marcus's notes. For 3 years she had searched for evidence. Now, she was searching for meaning. She stared at the sentence in Daniel's recording. I'm afraid she'll look at me differently. Her mind immediately offered answers. Maybe he had hidden debt. Maybe he had been ill. Maybe he'd made a terrible mistake. Then, she stopped herself. No. She remembered Harold's words. People create stories to fill the gaps. She took a deep breath. I don't know. For the first time since the trial, she refused to let assumptions become facts. It was harder than she expected. The human mind hated unanswered questions. It rushed to complete unfinished stories. But perhaps that was exactly how innocent people became guilty. Someone guessed. Someone assumed. Someone filled in a blank with the answer that felt most convincing. And eventually, everyone believed it. Vanessa carefully gathered the papers into neat piles. She wasn't going to guess anymore. From now on, she would follow only what she could prove. Outside, rain began tapping gently against the windows. She looked toward the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere, hidden beneath years of grief and mistaken memories, the truth was waiting. She just didn't know that someone else had already discovered it. And that person had spent the last 3 years too afraid to come forward. The rain continued through the night. It drummed softly against Vanessa's bedroom window, the steady rhythm carrying her back to another storm years ago. She remembered standing in this very room while Daniel struggled to assemble a bookshelf they'd bought from a discount furniture store. "This thing came with too many screws," he'd complained. Vanessa laughed. "I don't think furniture comes with extra screws. It does when the manufacturer enjoys watching marriages fail." She had laughed so hard she'd nearly dropped the instruction manual. Looking back now, she couldn't remember whether the bookshelf had leaned slightly to one side because Daniel had made a mistake, or because the floor itself wasn't level. It amazed her how confidently she had remembered tiny details that might never have happened the way she believed. The past wasn't changing. Only her understanding of it was. The following morning, Marcus called before sunrise. "I need you to come to my office." His voice was unusually tense. "Did something happen?" "I think we found someone." Vanessa grabbed her keys. "Who?" "I'd rather explain in person." 45 minutes later, she hurried into Marcus's office. Benjamin Rhodes was already there. So was Harold Whitaker. Vanessa looked from one man to the other. "You know each other?" Benjamin nodded. "We met yesterday." Marcus closed the conference room door. "Harold remembered something after speaking with you." Harold rubbed his weathered hands together. "I didn't lie to you." "I know, but I didn't tell you everything either." Vanessa sat quietly. "What else happened that day?" Harold stared at the table. "After you and Daniel left the lake, another man arrived." Her heart skipped. "What man?" "I'd never seen him before." "What did he do?" "He was arguing with someone." Benjamin leaned forward. "My brother?" Harold nodded slowly. "I think so." The room fell silent. Marcus opened a notebook. "Did you hear what they were arguing about?" "Not clearly." "Anything?" Harold closed his eyes. "I remember one sentence." Everyone waited. "The stranger said." He swallowed. "You can't keep lying to him forever." Benjamin looked back at Marcus. Nobody spoke. Marcus finally broke the silence. "That sounds remarkably similar to the note Daniel received." Vanessa's pulse quickened. "He deserves to know. You can't keep lying to him forever." The pieces were beginning to fit together, but they still didn't reveal the picture. Death row. Daniel sat alone in the prison library. He wasn't reading. The book lay open in front of him, untouched. Instead, he kept replaying Benjamin Rhodes' visit. "Someone has been lying." The words echoed endlessly. Had someone lied about him? To him? Or had he unknowingly built his life around someone else's lie? A prison officer approached. "Brooks." Daniel looked up. "You've got another visitor." "I already had one yesterday." "I know. This one's different." Minutes later, Daniel entered the visitation room. Vanessa smiled as soon as she saw him. He immediately knew something had changed. She looked lighter, not happier, hopeful. "I found a cassette tape." Daniel frowned. "What cassette tape?" "It was inside your journal." Confusion spread across his face. "My journal?" She nodded. "It has your voice on it." His eyes widened. "I don't remember making any recordings." "You weren't alone." She carefully repeated everything she'd heard. The older man's voice, the unfinished conversation, the secret Daniel planned to tell her. When she finished, Daniel looked genuinely stunned. "I honestly don't remember that." Vanessa reached across the table. "It's okay." "No." He shook his head. "It isn't." He lowered his voice. "If I was hiding something from you, I deserved the chance to tell you myself." She squeezed his hand. "I know." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Vanessa smiled gently. "I'm not angry." "You aren't?" "I'm curious." Daniel laughed softly. "You've always been curious. I married a man who labeled storage boxes alphabetically. I liked organization. You labeled Christmas decorations. So? There was only one box." He grinned. "I still knew exactly where it was." For a brief moment, the prison disappeared. The cameras disappeared. The guards disappeared. They were simply husband and wife again, remembering who they had always been. Marcus spent the afternoon reviewing the original police interviews. One sentence caught his attention. A detective had written, "Subject appeared uncertain after repeated questioning." Marcus frowned. He pulled another file. Then another, again and again. He noticed the same pattern. Questions asked repeatedly. Timelines challenged repeatedly. Details suggested before Daniel answered. Marcus leaned back. He had seen interrogation tactics before. Most were legal. Some were dangerously persuasive. He whispered to himself, they didn't just ask what he remembered. They may have told him what to remember. Educational value often hides inside ordinary discoveries. Marcus thought about juries. Most people believed memory worked like a video recording. In reality, memory is reconstructive. Every time we remember an event, the brain pieces it back together. Stress, repeated questioning, assumptions, and even other people's opinions can influence what we later believe we saw or heard. It wasn't dishonesty, it was human psychology. And sometimes, it changed lives forever. That evening, Vanessa visited Mrs. Carter. The elderly woman was baking peach cobbler. "It smells wonderful." Mrs. Carter smiled. "Sit." Vanessa did. After several minutes, she asked, "Can I ask you something?" "You already are." Vanessa laughed. "If two people remember the same day differently, does it mean one of them is lying?" Mrs. Carter shook her head. "No." "Then how do you know who's right?" The older woman removed the cobbler from the oven. "You don't always." Vanessa looked puzzled. Mrs. Carter continued, "When my husband was alive, we argued every anniversary about our first date." Vanessa smiled. "He remembered it differently." "Oh, completely. He swore I wore a blue dress. I insisted it was green. One year, our daughter found the photograph. And?" Mrs. Carter laughed. "It was yellow." Both women burst into laughter. "You know what we learned?" "What?" "We had spent 40 years trying to prove who was right, instead of enjoying the memory itself." Vanessa fell quiet. How many arguments in life began because people defended memories rather than seeking truth? Later that night, Benjamin Rhodes unlocked the final box from his late brother's storage unit. It contained old financial records, tax returns, insurance documents, receipts, nothing unusual, until a small locked metal cash box appeared beneath a blanket. Benjamin frowned. He had never seen it before. After several attempts, he forced the rusted latch open. Inside sat only 3 items: a passport, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope. Across the front, in his brother's unmistakable handwriting, was 7 words that made his blood run cold. "If anything happens to me, find Daniel." Benjamin's hands began to tremble. For 3 years he had believed Daniel Brooks murdered his brother. Now, his own brother's final written instruction suggested exactly the opposite. Somewhere, hidden beneath years of silence, was a truth powerful enough that a dead man had tried to protect it. And Benjamin suddenly realized that whoever had truly committed the murder might also have known this envelope existed. He locked the office door. Because, for the first time, he wasn't just searching for answers. He might already be in danger. Benjamin Rhodes didn't sleep. The sealed envelope sat on his dining room table all night, untouched. Every time he reached for it, he stopped. Not because he was afraid of what it contained, because he was afraid of what it might force him to admit. For 3 years he had attended every hearing. He had stared across courtrooms at Daniel Brooks with quiet hatred. He had comforted his late mother's belief that justice had been served. He had convinced himself that anger was easier than grief. Now, a single handwritten sentence threatened to undo everything. "If anything happens to me, find Daniel." His older brother, Michael Rhodes, had never wasted words. If he'd written Daniel's name, there had been a reason. Benjamin picked up the envelope. His fingers trembled as he carefully broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter, nothing more. He unfolded it slowly. "Ben, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. You know me well enough to understand that I don't scare easily, so if I've left you this letter, it's because I believe I'm running out of time. Whatever people tell you, Daniel Brooks is not your enemy." Benjamin stopped reading. His throat tightened. He looked up at the silent house, then forced himself to continue. "I've made mistakes. One of those mistakes has placed Daniel in danger without him even realizing it. He believes we're arguing about business. We aren't. I'm trying to protect him from something he doesn't even know exists. If anything happens to me before I can explain everything, don't let anyone convince you Daniel is responsible. He deserves the truth. So does his wife." The final line was unsigned. It didn't need to be. Benjamin lowered the letter onto the table. For several minutes, he simply stared. Then, for the first time since his brother's death, he cried. Not because Michael was gone, because he'd spent 3 years hating an innocent man. Across town, Marcus Ellis was already waiting when Benjamin arrived. Without a word, Benjamin handed him the letter. Marcus read it once, then again. His expression hardened. "This changes everything." Benjamin nodded. "I know. It doesn't prove Daniel's innocence." "No, but it destroys the prosecution's motive." Marcus looked up. "And motive was the foundation of the entire case." Benjamin rubbed his forehead. "What happens now?" Marcus folded the letter carefully. Now. We find out what Michael was trying to protect. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood inside Daniel's workshop. The old building had remained locked since his arrest. She hadn't entered it in nearly 3 years. Dust floated lazily through the sunlight pouring in from the high windows. Every tool still hung exactly where Daniel had left it. His measuring tapes, his chisels, his clamps, everything was perfectly organized. People often joked that Daniel treated woodworking like surgery. Every tool had its place. Every project had a plan. Vanessa smiled faintly. You'd hate this dust. She picked up a hand plane from the workbench. It still smelled faintly of cedar. Closing her eyes, she could almost hear him humming while he worked. Not because the memory was perfect, but because it had become part of her. Then something caught her attention. A small notebook rested beneath the workbench. She frowned. She didn't remember seeing it before. The notebook contained measurements, furniture sketches, customer orders, nothing unusual. Until she reached the final pages. Instead of woodworking plans, Daniel had drawn maps. Simple maps. Roads, parking lots, buildings. One location appeared repeatedly. Rhodes Logistics Warehouse. Her heart skipped. The warehouse where Michael Rhodes had been murdered. Why had Daniel drawn it so many times? She continued turning pages. Beside one sketch, Daniel had written, North entrance camera broken. Another note read, blind spot behind loading dock. Then, another, someone keeps entering after hours. Vanessa's pulse quickened. Daniel hadn't been planning furniture. He'd been observing something. She immediately called Marcus. I found something. What is it? A notebook. Bring it. An hour later, Marcus carefully examined every page. This wasn't introduced at trial. It was never found. He nodded thoughtfully. Do you know why Daniel was making these notes? Vanessa shook her head. No. Marcus tapped one sentence with his pen. Someone keeps entering after hours. This, he whispered, suggests Daniel suspected something long before the murder. Benjamin looked over Marcus's shoulder. My brother never mentioned this. Marcus looked at him. Maybe because he didn't know Daniel had noticed. The room grew quiet. Sometimes, the most important evidence wasn't what people hid. It was what everyone overlooked because they didn't know it mattered. Death row. Daniel stared at the ceiling of his cell. Something about the warehouse maps tugged at his memory. He couldn't see them. He didn't know Vanessa had found them. Yet his mind refused to let go of one image. A security light. Flashing. On, off, on, off. Why did that matter? He squeezed his eyes shut. The harder he chased the memory, the farther it retreated. Then Dr. Meyer's words returned. Repeating a story isn't the same as remembering an event. He stopped trying. Instead, he imagined himself walking through the warehouse naturally. The smell of sawdust, the sound of forklifts, the cold October air. Suddenly, another sound appeared, not imagined, remembered. A train horn. Long, loud. He opened his eyes. The train. It had passed the warehouse that night. He was certain of it. Educational value often comes from understanding how memory works. Strong emotions don't always strengthen memory. Sometimes they narrow it. People experiencing fear or shock often remember one vivid detail while forgetting many others. Later, the brain fills in the missing pieces, making the memory feel complete, even when parts are inaccurate. That is why careful investigation should rely on evidence, not confidence alone. Confidence and accuracy are not always the same. That afternoon, Marcus visited the district attorney's archives. He requested the original warehouse security reports. The clerk disappeared into storage. Several minutes later, she returned carrying 2 dusty folders. Marcus opened the first. Routine maintenance, camera inspections, electrical repairs. Then he stopped. One maintenance report read, loading dock camera 4th. Reported malfunction. October 10th repair completed. October 20th. First, Marcus's heart began to race. October 20th 1st. 4 days after the murder. He looked again at Daniel's notebook. North entrance camera broken. Daniel had noticed the broken camera before anyone else officially documented it. Which meant he hadn't been hiding evidence. He had been paying attention. And if someone knew exactly where the cameras weren't working, then the murder might have been planned around those blind spots. Marcus immediately reached for his phone. Vanessa. His voice was calm but urgent. I think we're finally asking the right questions. Outside the courthouse, storm clouds gathered over the city once again. Somewhere beyond those dark skies, the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. And the closer they came to finding it, the more dangerous their search would become. Marcus had spent nearly 20 years practicing law. He had learned one lesson early. The truth rarely arrived all at once. It came in fragments, a forgotten receipt. A single sentence buried in thousands of pages. A witness who remembered one insignificant detail years later. Justice wasn't usually found by discovering something extraordinary. It was found by refusing to ignore the ordinary. He hurried back to his office carrying the warehouse maintenance reports. Benjamin and Vanessa were already waiting. Marcus spread the documents across the conference table. I want you both to look at these dates. Vanessa leaned closer. October 10th. Benjamin read the second report. October 20th, first. Marcus nodded. The loading dock camera was broken for 11 days. Benjamin frowned. The murder happened on October 17th. Exactly. Marcus tapped Daniel's notebook. Daniel wrote that camera 4 wasn't working before the murder. Vanessa looked at him. What does that tell us? Marcus answered quietly. It tells us Daniel noticed a weakness in the warehouse's security. Benjamin folded his arms. But that doesn't prove he used it. No. Marcus looked directly at him. It suggests someone else may have. Vanessa remained silent. Her thoughts drifted back to Daniel's workshop. He had always noticed details other people ignored. If a chair leg was 1 millimeter shorter than the others, he spotted it instantly. If a cabinet door wasn't perfectly aligned, it bothered him until he fixed it. She remembered teasing him during their second year of marriage. You notice everything. Daniel had smiled. No, I notice what changes. At the time, she thought he was talking about wood. Now, she wondered whether he'd been talking about people. Marcus opened another folder. I requested the original employee attendance logs. Benjamin raised an eyebrow. Weren't those introduced during trial? Only the summary. Marcus slid several handwritten sign-in sheets across the table. The originals never were. Vanessa studied the pages. Names, times, signatures. Then, one line stood out. The signature beside Daniel Brooks looked different. She frowned. Marcus? He looked up. This isn't Daniel's handwriting. Benjamin leaned in. You can tell? She nodded without hesitation. I've watched him sign birthday cards, tax forms, mortgage papers, and Christmas gifts for 13 years. She pointed at the page. He never writes the letter D like this. Marcus compared it to Daniel's signature on another document. His expression changed immediately. They're different. Benjamin whispered. Someone signed him in. Silence filled the room. For years, everyone had assumed Daniel entered the warehouse that evening because his signature appeared on the attendance log. No one had questioned whether he had written it. Marcus immediately photographed both documents. If this signature is forged. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, at the prison, Daniel sat in the recreation yard. Death row inmates rarely spoke much. Most conversations lasted only a few minutes. Hope could be exhausting. An older inmate named Frank lowered himself onto the bench beside him. You've got visitors coming tomorrow. Daniel nodded. I know. Frank smiled. I've noticed something. What? You've stopped looking like a man waiting to die. Daniel looked away. I don't know what I look like anymore. Frank chuckled softly. I've been here 18 years. I know the difference. Daniel remained quiet. Frank continued. When a man gives up, he starts remembering only his failures. And when he hasn't, he remembers the people still waiting for him. Daniel smiled faintly. I think about Vanessa every day. Frank nodded. That's why you're still alive. That evening, Vanessa returned home carrying copies of the forged signature. Mrs. Carter noticed the papers tucked beneath her arm. Working late again? Vanessa smiled. I think we're getting somewhere. The older woman nodded approvingly. Good. Vanessa hesitated. Can I ask you something? You've been asking me questions your whole marriage. Vanessa laughed. Did Daniel ever seem... She searched for the right word. Afraid? Mrs. Carter thought for a moment. Not for himself. Vanessa frowned. What do you mean? He worried about you. When? The week before he was arrested. Vanessa felt her heartbeat quicken. He said something strange. What did he say? Mrs. Carter looked toward the fading sunset. He asked me. If anything ever happened to me. Vanessa's breath caught. Would you check on Vanessa? Tears instantly filled her eyes. He said that? Mrs. Carter nodded. I asked him why. He smiled. And he said, The elderly woman paused. Some storms give you enough warning to protect the people you love. Vanessa sat down heavily. Daniel had known. Not everything, but enough to worry. Enough to prepare. Enough to make promises. Yet he had never frightened her with his suspicions. Instead, He had quietly tried to shield her. She covered her face, not with grief, with gratitude. Even standing at the edge of disaster, his first concern had been her safety. Educational value often hides inside acts of quiet love. Many people believe love is proved through dramatic gestures, but lasting love is more often revealed in ordinary choices. Checking that someone arrived home safely, remembering how they take their coffee, keeping promises no one else notices, protecting another person's peace even when carrying your own burdens. These quiet acts rarely make headlines, yet they are often the strongest evidence of genuine commitment. The next morning, Marcus arranged another prison visit. This time he carried the forged attendance sheet. Daniel studied it carefully. After only a few seconds, he shook his head. "That's not my signature." Marcus nodded. "I know." Daniel looked surprised. "How?" Vanessa recognized it immediately. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. "Of course she did." Marcus smiled back. "She knows you better than anyone." Daniel looked down at the paper. "I always cross my capital D." Marcus pointed. "This signature doesn't." Daniel suddenly froze. "Wait." Marcus leaned forward. "What?" "I've seen that handwriting before." "Where?" Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. "Give me a second." The room fell silent. He wasn't forcing the memory. He simply let it come. Then, his eyes opened. "The warehouse inventory sheets." Marcus's heart began to pound. "Whose handwriting?" Daniel answered quietly. "I don't remember his name." But he worked in shipping." Marcus immediately wrote the note down. "Anything else?" Daniel nodded slowly. "He always borrowed my pen." Outside the prison, Marcus stood beside his car, replaying the conversation. A shipping employee. Someone who imitated Daniel's signature, often enough to make it look convincing. Someone who had access to the warehouse. Someone who knew the cameras weren't working. He looked toward the prison walls. For the first time, the case wasn't just falling apart. It was pointing toward someone else. Across town, Benjamin's phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" A distorted voice spoke only one sentence. "Stop looking into your brother's death, or you'll end up beside him." The line went dead. Benjamin stood frozen. The threat was real, which meant one thing. Someone was watching, and whoever had framed Daniel Brooks had finally realized the truth was beginning to surface. Benjamin stared at his phone long after the call had ended. The screen had already gone dark. His reflection looked back at him, older than he remembered, more tired. For 3 years, he had believed he was chasing justice for his brother. Now, justice had begun chasing him. He replayed the anonymous voice in his mind. "Stop looking into your brother's death, or you'll end up beside him." Most threats were designed to create fear. This one created certainty. Someone knew he was getting close. Instead of going home, Benjamin drove straight to Marcus's office. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Benjamin finished, Marcus folded his hands. "Did you recognize the voice?" Benjamin shook his head. "It sounded electronically altered." Marcus nodded. "I expected something like this." "You expected threats?" "I expected resistance." Benjamin frowned. "Why?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Because lies are expensive." Benjamin looked confused. Marcus continued. "The longer a lie survives, the more people become invested in protecting it." He paused. "Especially when careers, reputations, or freedom depend on it." Vanessa arrived a few minutes later, carrying breakfast for everyone. 3 coffees, bagels, fresh fruit. She smiled faintly. "I figured none of us remembered to eat." Benjamin couldn't help smiling. "My brother used to do that. When meetings ran long, he'd suddenly disappear and come back with sandwiches." Vanessa placed the food on the table. Daniel did the same thing. Marcus looked at both of them. "Interesting." "What?" "You both remembered kindness before conflict." Benjamin lowered his eyes. "I spent 3 years trying to remember reasons to hate him." "And now?" Benjamin sighed. "Now I keep remembering reasons I should have questioned everything." Marcus opened a large cardboard archive box. "I've requested every employment record from Rhodes Logistics." Vanessa looked surprised. "They still had them?" "Fortunately." Marcus smiled. "Some companies never throw anything away." Hours passed. Personnel files, payroll records, performance reviews, training certificates. Then, Marcus stopped turning pages. "Here." Vanessa looked over his shoulder. The employee file belonged to a shipping clerk, Ethan Calloway. Daniel's breath echoed in Marcus's memory. "He always borrowed my pen." Marcus pulled out Ethan's employment application, then another document, then another. He placed them beside Daniel's signature. Everyone leaned closer. Benjamin whispered, "It's the same handwriting." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed a magnifying glass from his desk drawer. Years of legal practice had taught him never to trust first impressions. After several minutes, he nodded slowly. "The capital D." Vanessa stared. "The loop." Marcus pointed. "And the way he finishes his Y." Benjamin swallowed. He copied Daniel's writing. Educational value sometimes begins with something simple. People often assume that if two signatures look similar, they must belong to the same person. But handwriting experts don't focus only on appearance. They study habits, the pressure of the pen, the rhythm, the spacing, tiny movements that people rarely control consciously. Just as every person's voice carries unique characteristics, handwriting often reveals patterns difficult to fake consistently. That is why investigators compare original documents instead of relying on memory or assumptions. Marcus continued searching Ethan Calloway's file. One page immediately caught his attention. Employment status. Resigned. October 18th. The day after the murder. Benjamin frowned. "He quit?" Marcus nodded. No forwarding address. No interview. No explanation. Vanessa looked at Marcus. "Did anyone try to find him?" Marcus slowly closed the file. "It doesn't appear so." The room fell silent. 3 years. An employee connected to Daniel. A suspicious signature. And he had disappeared the morning after the murder. Death Row Correctional Institution. Daniel sat quietly in the prison chapel. He wasn't particularly religious, but the chapel offered something rare. Silence without loneliness. The chaplain entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "They still call this coffee." Daniel smiled. "Barely." The chaplain handed him one. "You've been remembering again." Daniel nodded. "I think pieces are coming back." "Pieces?" "The small things." He looked into the cup. "I remembered a train." The chaplain listened patiently. "I remembered a flickering security light. And today." Daniel frowned. "I remembered someone asking to borrow my pen." The chaplain smiled. "Funny what survives." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" "When my wife passed away." The chaplain said softly, "People ask me what I remembered most." Daniel remained silent. "They expected me to say our wedding, our first kiss, our last conversation." "What did you tell them?" The older man smiled gently. "I remembered how she always stole the crispy bacon from my breakfast." Daniel laughed unexpectedly. "Really? Really?" The chaplain chuckled. "Love doesn't live only inside life's biggest moments. It hides inside the ordinary." Daniel stared quietly at the steam rising from his cup. Vanessa always stole his fries. Every single time, even when she ordered her own. He smiled to himself. Across town, Vanessa unlocked Daniel's workshop again. This time she wasn't searching randomly. She walked directly toward the filing cabinet beneath the workbench. If Daniel had been documenting suspicious activity, there had to be more. She carefully opened the bottom drawer. Old invoices, wood samples, customer receipts. Then, a thin black notebook hidden beneath a false wooden panel. Her pulse quickened. She lifted it carefully. Inside, no furniture sketches, no customer names, only dates, times, vehicle license plate numbers, and brief descriptions. White cargo van. Returns after midnight. Driver changes vehicles frequently. Unloading with warehouse lights off. Vanessa covered her mouth. Daniel hadn't simply noticed strange behavior. He had been documenting it for months. One final entry had been written only 2 days before the murder. It was shorter than the others, shakier, as though he'd written it quickly. "Michael finally believes me." Beneath that, one final sentence. "Meeting Friday. We end this together." Friday, October 17th. The day Michael Rhodes died. Vanessa's hands began trembling. She immediately photographed every page. Then called Marcus. "I know why Daniel was at the warehouse." Marcus answered without hesitation. "Tell me." "He wasn't meeting Michael to fight." She looked again at the notebook. "He was meeting him because they'd finally decided to expose someone." Silence. Then Marcus spoke quietly. "If that's true, Daniel didn't walk into a murder. He walked into a trap." Vanessa looked around the empty workshop. For the first time since the trial, she wasn't searching for evidence that Daniel was innocent. She was beginning to understand why someone needed him to look guilty. And somewhere, a man named Ethan Calloway had vanished 3 years earlier, with answers that could change everything. Marcus spread the contents of Daniel's black notebook across the conference table. Every license plate number, every date, every handwritten observation. For several minutes, no one spoke. Sometimes, silence wasn't empty. Sometimes it was respect. Respect for a man who had quietly tried to do the right thing without ever imagining how much it would cost him. Benjamin finally broke the silence. My brother knew. Marcus nodded. I believe he did. He believed Daniel. I think he eventually realized Daniel wasn't imagining things. Benjamin lowered his head. And 3 days later, my brother was dead. Vanessa stared at the final entry. Meeting Friday. We end this together. She traced the words gently with her fingertip. Daniel always pressed harder with his pen whenever he was determined about something. She had teased him about it once. You're going to tear through the paper. He'd laughed. My handwriting gets louder when I'm serious. At the time, she thought it was one of those odd little habits that made him unique. Now it reminded her that even ordinary details could carry extraordinary meaning. She smiled sadly. You really were trying to stop something. Marcus looked toward Benjamin. I need permission. For what? To reopen every financial record your brother ever kept. Benjamin frowned. They already investigated his finances. They investigated for motive. Marcus leaned forward. I'm looking for patterns. Patterns? People laundering money don't usually leave dramatic clues. They leave routines. Benjamin nodded slowly. Do it. Meanwhile, 268 miles away, Daniel sat alone in his cell, reading one of the history books Vanessa had mailed months earlier. He had reached the same page 3 times. He still couldn't tell anyone what it said. His thoughts kept returning to the warehouse. Not the murder. The weeks before it. There had been something that bothered him long before Michael died. He closed the book. Instead of forcing the memory, he began thinking about the workshop. The smell of fresh oak, the roughness of unfinished timber, the old radio that never tuned properly. Then, a face appeared. Not clearly, just enough to stir recognition. Dark hair, a baseball cap, always chewing mint gum. Daniel sat upright. Mint. Why did he suddenly remember mint? He frowned. Someone at the warehouse always chewed mint gum. Someone who constantly asked to borrow his pen. His heartbeat quickened. Ethan? The name escaped before he realized he had spoken aloud. A correctional officer walking past glanced inside the cell. You all right, Brooks? Daniel nodded absent-mindedly. I just remembered someone. Back in Asheville, Mrs. Carter knocked gently on Vanessa's front door. I made chicken soup. Vanessa smiled. You keep rescuing me. The elderly woman chuckled. Honey. People don't always need rescuing. Sometimes they just need reminding to eat. Vanessa invited her inside. The 2 women sat quietly at the kitchen table. After a few minutes, Mrs. Carter looked around the house. You've changed something. Vanessa blinked. I have? The curtains. Vanessa looked toward the living room. She had opened every curtain that morning. For nearly 3 years, they had remained closed. She hadn't even realized she'd done it. Mrs. Carter smiled knowingly. When people begin believing tomorrow might be different, they usually let the light back in. Vanessa looked out the window. Perhaps hope didn't always arrive with fireworks. Perhaps it entered quietly, like morning sunlight, through an open curtain. Educational value often appears in the smallest choices. Grief has a way of shrinking life. People stop opening curtains, stop answering calls, stop cooking favorite meals, stop making plans. Healing rarely begins with one dramatic breakthrough. It usually begins with one ordinary decision: opening a window, taking a walk, calling a friend, preparing a meal. Small actions remind the heart that life is still moving forward, even when pain insists it has stopped. Marcus spent the afternoon reviewing bank statements recovered from Michael Rhodes's office. Thousands of ordinary transactions filled the pages. Fuel, equipment, payroll, maintenance, nothing unusual. Then, a series of identical transfers caught his attention. Every month, same amount, same date. Paid to a company he had never heard of. Blue Ridge Transport Solutions. Marcus searched the business registry. No active company. He searched again. Still, nothing. Benjamin looked over his shoulder. What's wrong? Marcus pointed at the payments. A business that doesn't seem to exist. Benjamin frowned. My brother wouldn't pay a fake company. No. Marcus agreed quietly. But someone might have wanted him to. Vanessa's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? A woman's voice replied. Is this Vanessa Brooks? Yes. My name is Sarah Calloway. Vanessa felt her breath catch. Calloway. The surname hit her immediately. Ethan Calloway? There was a long silence. He's my younger brother. Vanessa gripped the phone tighter. Where is he? I don't know. Her voice cracked. I haven't seen Ethan in almost 3 years. Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with Marcus. Sarah continued. I found your number after reading about Daniel Brooks. What do you know? Another silence. Then, my brother disappeared because he was terrified. Marcus quietly activated the speakerphone. Sarah continued speaking. The last time I saw him, he kept saying he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Vanessa asked softly. Did he tell you what happened? No. But he left something with me. Everyone in the room leaned forward. A sealed package. What was inside? I promised I wouldn't open it. Sarah's voice shook. He told me. If anything happens to me. Marcus and Benjamin looked at one another. The words sounded painfully familiar. Sarah finished the sentence. Give this to Daniel Brooks. Nobody spoke. For several seconds, the only sound in the office was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Marcus finally broke the silence. Sarah? Do you still have the package? Yes. Will you meet us? I will. But... She hesitated. I've been followed. The room instantly grew tense. What do you mean? I've noticed the same black SUV outside my apartment 3 times this week. Benjamin stood. Don't go anywhere. Marcus nodded firmly. We'll come to you. Sarah whispered one final sentence before ending the call. I think someone knows I still have it. The line went dead. Marcus immediately grabbed his coat. Benjamin reached for his keys. Vanessa picked up Daniel's notebook. For months, they had been looking backward. Now, for the first time, the truth was waiting in the hands of someone still alive. If they reached Sarah before whoever was watching her, Daniel might finally have the chance to come home. But if they were too late, another witness could disappear. And with her, perhaps the last piece of the truth. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If telling the truth could cost you your freedom, or even your life, would you still have the courage to speak up? Or would you stay silent to protect yourself? Let us know your answer in the comments. Your perspective could encourage someone else who is facing a difficult choice in their own life. If you're enjoying this story, and you believe that truth, loyalty, and genuine love are always worth fighting for, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story filled with powerful life lessons. Remember, silence may feel safe for a while, but the truth has a way of finding its voice. And sometimes, one courageous decision can change countless lives. Now, let's see what Sarah has been protecting for the last 3 years. Marcus drove. Benjamin sat in the passenger seat, gripping the dashboard every time traffic slowed. Vanessa sat in the back seat with Daniel's black notebook resting on her lap, reading the final page over and over again. Meeting Friday. We end this together. She had read those 5 words at least 50 times. Each time, they seemed to carry a little more weight. Not because the words had changed, because her understanding of them had. Daniel hadn't walked into the warehouse expecting violence. He had walked in believing the nightmare was finally about to end. The thought broke her heart. They arrived at Sarah Calloway's apartment complex just before sunset. It was a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Knoxville. Brick buildings, children riding bicycles, neighbors walking dogs. Ordinary. The sort of place where people assumed terrible things only happened somewhere else. Marcus parked across the street. Do you see the SUV? Benjamin slowly scanned the parking lot. No. Vanessa looked around carefully. Neither do I. Marcus wasn't convinced. Let's stay alert. Sarah opened the apartment door before they had a chance to knock. She looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Her hands trembled as she welcomed them inside. Thank you for coming. Vanessa smiled gently. Thank you for trusting us. Sarah glanced nervously through the curtains before locking the door. I haven't slept properly in days. Marcus noticed immediately. You're frightened. She nodded. I keep telling myself I'm imagining things. Benjamin spoke softly. Sometimes fear exaggerates. Sarah looked at him. And sometimes it doesn't. No one argued. Her apartment was modest, but warm. Family photographs filled the bookshelves. One picture immediately caught Vanessa's attention. A teenage Ethan stood beside Sarah outside a high school graduation. He looked nothing like the monster the prosecution had unknowingly allowed to disappear from the investigation. He looked ordinary. Marcus had learned long ago that evil rarely announced itself with a frightening face. Neither did guilt. Sarah returned carrying a medium-sized cardboard box sealed with brown packing tape. She placed it carefully on the coffee table. This is it. Nobody reached for it. Instead, Marcus asked, When did Ethan give this to you? The night before he disappeared. What did he say? Sarah closed her eyes. He kept apologizing. For what? He wouldn't tell me. Her voice began shaking. He only said, "Now, if Daniel Brooks ever gets the chance to prove he's innocent." She swallowed hard. This will help him. Vanessa felt tears sting her eyes. Even Ethan, the man they believed might know everything, had believed Daniel wasn't guilty. Marcus carefully cut the tape. Inside lay several neatly organized folders, a small external hard drive, a leather-bound notebook, and an envelope addressed in Ethan's handwriting. For Daniel Brooks. Marcus handed it to Vanessa. I think this belongs to him. She nodded quietly. But, until he's free. I'll protect it for him. Benjamin opened the leather notebook first. Every page contained dates, vehicle registration numbers, shipping schedules, warehouse loading times. Marcus frowned. This isn't a diary. Vanessa looked closer. It's surveillance. Benjamin turned another page, then another. Suddenly, he stopped. Marcus. What? Benjamin pointed to one sentence, highlighted in red ink. Michael found the second ledger. The room fell silent. Marcus looked up. Second ledger? Sarah whispered. I've never heard Ethan mention any ledger. Benjamin continued reading. Another sentence appeared several pages later. If Michael gives it to Daniel, everything is over. Vanessa's heart raced. What ledger? Marcus looked thoughtful. I think, we've been chasing the wrong evidence. Educational value often comes from recognizing a simple truth. When people investigate a problem, they naturally focus on what is obvious. But effective investigators ask a different question: what is missing? Sometimes the absence of evidence is itself evidence. A missing document, a missing phone, a missing conversation, or a missing ledger. Learning to notice what should be there but isn't is an important skill not only in investigations but in everyday life. Marcus connected the external hard drive to his laptop. Dozens of folders appeared. Photographs, invoices, shipping manifests, security reports. Everything carefully organized. Benjamin frowned. Ethan kept copies? Marcus nodded. Apparently. Vanessa leaned closer. One folder immediately stood out. Cameras. Marcus clicked it. Several security images filled the screen. Most showed ordinary warehouse activity. Employees unloading deliveries. Forklifts moving pallets. Nothing unusual. Then, one photograph froze everyone in place. Taken 2 weeks before the murder. It showed Daniel standing beside Michael Rhodes. Both men were smiling. Benjamin stared. My brother. Marcus nodded. They weren't arguing. Another photograph. Michael shook Daniel's hand. A third. The two men studied paperwork together. Vanessa smiled through tears. They trusted each other. Benjamin lowered his eyes. I spent 3 years believing they hated each other. Marcus opened another folder. This one contained scanned shipping invoices. The company name immediately caught his attention. Blue Ridge Transport Solutions. Benjamin leaned forward. The company that doesn't exist. Marcus nodded. Except. He clicked another document. It did exist. For exactly 14 months. Registered under Ethan Calloway's name. Vanessa frowned. But Ethan was only a shipping clerk. Marcus looked thoughtful. Which means he probably wasn't the real owner. At that exact moment, someone knocked loudly on Sarah's apartment door. Everyone froze. Another knock. Harder this time. Sarah's face turned pale. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus quietly closed the laptop. Benjamin moved toward the window. He carefully lifted one corner of the curtain. His expression changed instantly. What is it? Benjamin stepped back. The black SUV. Sarah covered her mouth. They found me. Marcus immediately lowered his voice. Nobody panic. The knocking became louder. Sarah Calloway. A man's voice echoed through the apartment. We need to speak with you. Marcus looked at Sarah. Do you know that voice? She slowly shook her head. No. The voice came again. This won't take long. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he quietly dialed emergency services on his mobile phone. Before the call connected, the apartment lights suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, the engine of the black SUV continued idling. And whoever had spent 3 years protecting the truth had finally caught up with the people trying to uncover it. Darkness swallowed the apartment. For a split second, no one moved. The only sounds were the hum of the black SUV outside and Sarah's uneven breathing. Marcus instinctively reached into his jacket pocket and switched on the flashlight on his phone. A narrow beam of light cut through the room. Everyone stay calm, he said quietly. Benjamin moved closer to the window. They're still outside. How many? I can only see 2. Another loud knock shook the front door. Sarah Calloway! The unfamiliar voice returned. We know you're in there. Sarah's hands trembled uncontrollably. I don't want to open it. Marcus nodded. You're not going to. He had already connected to emergency services. Keeping his voice low, he gave the operator the apartment address and explained that several unknown individuals were attempting to force contact with a potential witness in an active murder investigation. The dispatcher assured him officers were on their way. Marcus ended the call. They know. Sarah exhaled shakily. Thank you. Outside, the knocking stopped. Silence settled over the apartment. Sometimes silence was more frightening than noise. Benjamin continued watching through the narrow opening in the curtain. They're talking. What are they doing? I can't hear. Then, one of the men looked directly toward the apartment window. Benjamin immediately stepped back. I think they know someone's watching. 5 minutes later, red and blue lights reflected across the living room walls. 2 police cruisers entered the apartment complex. The black SUV pulled away almost immediately. Benjamin watched it disappear around the corner. They're leaving. Marcus nodded. They never intended to stay. No. They wanted to know whether Sarah still had something worth protecting. After the officers confirmed everyone was safe, Marcus explained only what was necessary. He deliberately avoided mentioning the notebook, the hard drive, or the letter. Experience had taught him an important lesson. Information should be shared carefully until you know exactly who needs to hear it. Once the police left, Sarah locked the door again. I can't stay here. Marcus agreed. You shouldn't. Benjamin spoke immediately. You'll stay at my house. Sarah looked surprised. You don't even know me. Benjamin smiled sadly. I spent 3 years believing the wrong person. I'm not making that mistake twice. They returned to Marcus's office just after midnight. Nobody mentioned how tired they were. Some discoveries refused to wait until morning. Marcus connected Ethan's hard drive once again. This time, he said quietly, we read everything. Hours passed. Thousands of files, emails, delivery schedules, warehouse photographs. Then, Vanessa opened a folder named simply Personal. Inside were voice recordings, family photographs, receipts. Then one file immediately caught her attention. If I disappear. The room became silent. Marcus clicked play. Static crackled. Then Ethan's voice filled the speakers. He sounded exhausted, terrified. I don't know who's going to hear this. A long pause. But, if you're listening, something has already gone wrong. Benjamin lowered his head. Hearing Ethan's voice after 3 years felt almost surreal. The recording continued. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I was helping move illegal shipments. I never thought anyone would die. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Vanessa. Illegal shipments. So that was what Daniel had discovered. Ethan continued speaking. Daniel Brooks wasn't part of it. He started asking questions. So did Michael Rhodes. Another pause. They wanted to report everything. Vanessa covered her mouth. Benjamin closed his eyes. The recording continued. I should have told the police. I should have testified. I should have told Daniel the truth before it was too late. His breathing became heavier. If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. The recording ended. No one spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Benjamin whispered, My brother died trying to do the right thing. Marcus nodded. So did Ethan, in a different way. Vanessa looked toward Daniel's unopened letter. And Daniel lost everything because he trusted people. Educational value often comes from recognizing the true cost of silence. Many people remain quiet because they believe speaking up will only create trouble. But silence has consequences too. When honest people stay silent out of fear, those willing to deceive often gain the advantage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act, despite fear when doing so may protect someone else from harm. One truthful voice, even if delayed, can change the course of many lives. Marcus copied every file onto multiple encrypted drives. We're not risking losing this evidence. Benjamin nodded. What happens now? Marcus answered carefully. We verify everything. Vanessa looked surprised, even after this recording. Especially after this recording. She frowned. Marcus smiled gently. The truth doesn't become stronger because we believe it. It becomes stronger because it can be proven. Vanessa nodded slowly. That was another lesson she would never forget. Belief inspired hope. Evidence delivered justice. Early the next morning, Daniel sat in the prison visitation room once again. Vanessa entered, carrying only one envelope. She didn't tell him about the black SUV. She didn't mention the threats. She didn't want his remaining days, however many there might be, to be filled with worry over her safety. Instead, she placed the unopened envelope against the glass between them. "It has your name on it." Daniel looked down. His expression softened. "Ethan," Vanessa nodded. "We haven't opened it." He looked surprised. "You didn't?" She smiled. "It belongs to you." Daniel rested his fingertips against the glass opposite hers. "Thank you." "For what?" "For remembering that prison doesn't stop someone from being a husband." Her eyes filled with tears. "It never will." They smiled at each other in silence, not because words had run out, but because some moments deserved to exist without interruption. As Vanessa left the prison, Marcus's phone rang. The caller identified himself as a forensic document examiner. Marcus had sent Daniel's signature and Ethan Calloway's handwriting for urgent comparison the previous evening. He answered immediately. "This is Marcus Ellis." The expert spoke without hesitation. "I've completed the preliminary analysis." Marcus stepped away from the others. "And? There is very strong evidence that the warehouse attendant's signature attributed to Daniel Brooks was not written by him." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "What about Ethan Calloway?" A pause. Then came the words Marcus had hoped and feared to hear. "The handwriting characteristics are highly consistent with Ethan Calloway." Marcus thanked the examiner and ended the call. He looked toward the prison walls rising in the distance. For the first time in 3 years, he held professional evidence that someone had forged Daniel Brooks's presence at the warehouse. But as powerful as that discovery was, it also meant something else. Whoever had orchestrated the murder hadn't acted alone. Someone with far greater authority had made sure the forged documents, the missing evidence, and the false narrative all survived long enough to send an innocent man to death row. And Marcus had a growing suspicion that the next person they needed to question wasn't a warehouse employee at all. It was someone who had helped build the case against Daniel from the very beginning. Marcus Ellis had prosecuted cases before he ever defended them. That experience had taught him something he never forgot. Most wrongful convictions didn't happen because everyone involved was dishonest. They happened because people became convinced they already knew the answer. Once that happened, every new fact was interpreted through the same conclusion. It had a name. Confirmation bias. Find one piece of evidence that supports your theory. Ignore or explain away everything that doesn't. Marcus had seen it ruin lives. Now he feared it had nearly cost Daniel his. He drove to the county courthouse before sunrise. The building was almost empty. Only a few clerks had arrived. A janitor slowly pushed a mop across the polished marble floor. Marcus headed straight for the records division. "I need the original investigative files." The clerk looked up. "Which case?" "State versus Daniel Brooks." She typed for a moment. "They're archived." "I'll wait." Nearly an hour later, 2 large archive boxes landed on the table in front of him. Marcus smiled faintly. "So this is where the truth has been sleeping." He opened the first box. Crime scene photographs, evidence inventories, witness interviews, laboratory reports, thousands of pages. Somewhere inside, he believed there was one overlooked detail capable of changing everything. Meanwhile, Vanessa stopped outside a small church on her way home from the prison. She hadn't planned to go inside. In fact, she hadn't entered a church in almost 4 years. Not because she had stopped believing in God, because she had stopped knowing what to pray for. Innocence? Justice? Strength? Eventually every prayer had begun sounding the same. Today felt different. She quietly entered the sanctuary. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews with shades of blue, red, and gold. Only one other person sat inside, an elderly man quietly reading his Bible. Vanessa chose a pew near the back. She didn't kneel. She didn't close her eyes. She simply sat. Sometimes faith wasn't speaking. Sometimes it was choosing not to walk away. A few minutes later, the elderly man approached. "I don't believe we've met." Vanessa smiled politely. "I don't come very often." He nodded kindly. "My name's Pastor William." "I'm Vanessa." His expression softened almost immediately. "Vanessa Brooks?" She looked surprised. "You know me?" "I know your story." She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "Bringing sadness into a place that's supposed to bring hope." Pastor William smiled gently. "My dear, churches aren't hospitals for perfect people. They're waiting rooms for hurting ones." She laughed quietly through her tears. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The pastor sat beside her. "Tell me something. When your husband calls, what does he ask first?" She smiled without thinking. He asks whether I've eaten. And what do you ask? If he's sleeping. The pastor nodded. You see. She frowned. See what? Love. Real love keeps asking ordinary questions. It worries about everyday things because it plans on sharing tomorrow. Vanessa looked toward the sunlight. Perhaps hope wasn't something you found. Perhaps it was something you practiced, one ordinary act at a time. Back at the courthouse, Marcus reached the final folder inside the first archive box. It contained handwritten notes from Detective Howard Pierce, the lead investigator. Marcus read carefully. Most of the notes matched the official reports. Then one page stopped him cold. Scrawled hurriedly in the margin were 7 words. No signs of struggle between the men. Marcus frowned. No signs of struggle? He immediately opened the crime scene photographs. Michael Rhodes's body showed evidence of violence. But the surrounding warehouse office looked remarkably undisturbed. No overturned furniture. No broken glass. No scattered paperwork. Nothing suggesting a heated confrontation. Yet the prosecution had argued Daniel and Michael fought immediately before the murder. Marcus whispered to himself, then where's the fight? Educational value often begins with learning to question assumptions. Many people assume that if 2 people disagree, a fight must have happened. But investigators don't rely on assumptions. They ask, what evidence supports that conclusion? Critical thinking means separating what we believe from what we can actually prove. That skill is valuable not only in courtrooms, but also in relationships, workplaces, and everyday life. Misunderstandings often grow because people mistake assumptions for facts. Marcus immediately requested Detective Pierce's retirement contact information. The detective had left the police force 2 years earlier. An address appeared on the screen. 20 minutes away. Marcus didn't hesitate. Elsewhere, Benjamin sat alone in Michael's old office. For the first time since inheriting the company, he wasn't looking at financial reports. He was looking at family photographs. His older brother smiled from nearly every frame. Fishing trips. Company picnics. Then Benjamin noticed something strange. One photograph showed Michael standing beside Daniel at a charity fundraiser. Both men wore matching volunteer aprons. Both were laughing. Benjamin frowned. He had completely forgotten that evening. Not because it wasn't important, because grief had erased everything that contradicted the story he'd accepted. He remembered hating Daniel. He had forgotten years of friendship between the 2 men. His eyes filled with regret. Memory hadn't lied. It had simply become selective. At exactly 11 o'clock, Marcus knocked on the door of a modest farmhouse outside town. An elderly man answered after several moments. Grey hair, weathered face, sharp eyes. Detective Howard Pierce? The man nodded cautiously. I'm retired. Marcus extended his hand. Marcus Ellis. I represent Daniel Brooks. The detective's expression changed immediately. I thought that case was over. Marcus answered quietly. So did I. Howard invited him inside. The living room walls were lined with fishing photographs and police commendations. Marcus noticed one plaque that read, Integrity, above all else. He hoped it still meant something. I found one of your notes. Howard looked puzzled. Which one? Marcus placed a photocopy on the table. The detective read it, then sighed heavily. I remember writing that. Marcus leaned forward. Why wasn't it in your final report? Howard remained silent. Finally, he spoke. Because it didn't fit the theory. Marcus stared at him. The theory? We believed Daniel Brooks killed Michael during an argument. There were no signs of a fight. Howard rubbed his forehead. I mentioned that. What happened? My supervisor said, he closed his eyes briefly. People don't always leave evidence of every punch. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. So you removed it? Howard nodded slowly. I shouldn't have. No. Marcus agreed. You shouldn't have. The detective looked toward the window. I've regretted that decision ever since. Just then, Howard stood and walked into another room. He returned carrying a worn cardboard file. I kept copies. Marcus looked surprised. You weren't supposed to. I know. The detective placed the file on the table. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them. Marcus opened it. Inside were several photographs that had never been disclosed during the trial. One image immediately caught his attention. The warehouse office clock, frozen at 8:43 p.m. Marcus frowned. Every official timeline stated the murder occurred shortly after 9:15 p.m. He looked up. Why was this never introduced? Howard answered quietly. Because nobody could explain it. Marcus's heartbeat quickened. Perhaps the official timeline itself had been wrong all along. And if the timeline collapsed, So did the entire case against Daniel Brooks. Marcus didn't speak for several seconds. He held the photograph of the warehouse clock beneath the desk lamp, studying every shadow, every reflection, every tiny detail. The clock clearly read 8:43 p.m., not 9:15. Not shortly after 9, as the prosecution had insisted before the jury. 8:43. A difference of just over 30 minutes. To most people, half an hour didn't seem like much. In a murder case, it could mean the difference between guilt and innocence. Howard Pierce leaned back in his chair. I looked at that photograph 100 times. Marcus glanced up. And? I couldn't explain it. So, you ignored it? Howard shook his head immediately. No. I questioned it. What happened? The retired detective gave a weary smile. Sometimes, people don't want another answer. They want the answer they've already decided is true. Marcus didn't argue. He had seen it happen before. Evidence wasn't always rejected because it was weak. Sometimes it was rejected because it complicated an easy story. Howard opened another envelope from the old file. There was one more thing. He slid a faded Polaroid photograph across the table. It showed the warehouse loading dock from the outside. Marcus frowned. What am I looking at? Howard pointed toward the far corner. The delivery log says Daniel's truck arrived at 9:02. Marcus nodded. It did. Howard shook his head. No. He tapped the photograph. This picture was taken at 8:47. Marcus looked closer. The loading bay was completely empty. No truck, no Daniel, no activity. His pulse quickened. If this timestamp is accurate. Howard finished the sentence. Daniel couldn't have been inside the warehouse when the prosecution claimed the argument had already begun. Meanwhile, Vanessa returned home carrying Daniel's unopened letter from Ethan. She placed it carefully inside the living room drawer. She had promised herself she wouldn't read it. Not because curiosity had disappeared. Because some promises mattered more than curiosity. She smiled softly. Daniel had spent years trusting her with his heart. She could trust him with one sealed envelope. Mrs. Carter appeared at the back fence carrying a basket of fresh apples. I thought you might like these. Vanessa laughed. You're determined to keep me fed. I am. Mrs. Carter climbed the porch steps. As they sat together peeling apples, neither woman mentioned the trial. Instead, they talked about recipes, gardening, autumn leaves, normal things. After a while, Mrs. Carter spoke quietly. You know. What? When my Harold died. I stopped laughing for almost 2 years. Vanessa looked at her. I didn't know that. Most people don't. Mrs. Carter smiled sadly. Grief convinces you that smiling is somehow a betrayal. Vanessa nodded. I felt that. The older woman reached across the table. But healing isn't betrayal. It honors the people who loved us. Vanessa looked toward the open window. Maybe hope wasn't replacing Daniel. Maybe it was keeping the part of him that always believed tomorrow could be better. Educational value often begins with learning the difference between holding on and moving forward. Many people fear that healing means forgetting someone they love. In reality, healthy healing doesn't erase love. It allows love to become part of who we are, instead of the only thing we can see. Remembering with gratitude is different from living trapped in yesterday. Growth doesn't require forgetting. It requires carrying the past with wisdom, instead of letting it carry us. Across town, Benjamin and Sarah continued reviewing Ethan's hard drive. Thousands of files remained. Most were routine. Then Sarah paused. Wait. Benjamin looked over. What is it? She pointed at a folder named Backup. Inside was another folder, Ledger. Benjamin's heart began pounding. The second ledger. Sarah clicked it open. A spreadsheet appeared. Rows of dates, shipment numbers, bank transfers, company names. Everything meticulously recorded. Marcus arrived just as Sarah looked up from the screen. You need to see this. He hurried over. What did you find? Benjamin slowly turned the monitor. The money. Marcus scanned the entries. Payments, fake transport companies, false invoices, millions of dollars hidden through shell businesses. Then, one column froze him. Approved by. Every transaction carried initials. Not Ethan's, not Michael's, not Daniel's. Only 2 letters. RP. Marcus frowned. Who is RP? Benjamin looked stunned. I know exactly who that is. Marcus looked up. Richard Palmer? The company's chief financial officer. Silence filled the room. Richard Palmer had testified during Daniel's trial. He had calmly told the jury that Daniel argued constantly with Michael Rhodes over financial issues. Marcus remembered every word. Richard had sounded convincing. Professional, Trustworthy. Benjamin slowly sank into his chair. My brother trusted him. Marcus looked at the ledger again. And Richard Palmer had every reason to make sure Michael never exposed these accounts. Sarah whispered. So Daniel wasn't protecting himself. Marcus nodded. He was protecting the truth. The following morning, Marcus requested an emergency meeting with the district attorney. District Attorney Helen Foster had personally overseen Daniel's prosecution. She welcomed Marcus into her office with cautious curiosity. This must be important. Marcus placed the forged signature analysis on her desk. Then Ethan's recording transcript. Then the undisclosed crime scene photographs. Then the warehouse maintenance reports. Finally, the financial ledger. Helen remained silent as she examined each document. When she finished, she removed her glasses. Why wasn't any of this presented? Marcus answered honestly. Some of it was hidden. Some of it was overlooked. And some of it wasn't discovered until now. Helen looked out the window for a long moment. When I prosecuted Daniel Brooks, I believed we had the right man. Marcus nodded. I know. She looked back at him. I don't believe that anymore. Those words carried enormous weight. Not because they proved Daniel innocent, but because they came from the person who had once argued for his execution. Helen pressed a button on her desk phone. Cancel my afternoon meetings. Her assistant sounded surprised. For the rest of the day? Yes. She looked directly at Marcus. I think we're about to correct the biggest mistake of my career. Marcus quietly exhaled. After years of closed doors, one had finally opened. But before Daniel Brooks could walk free, there remained one final obstacle. Richard Palmer, the man whose initials appeared throughout the hidden ledger. The man who had testified against Daniel. The man who, if the evidence was correct, had built an empire of lies on the back of an innocent husband. And Marcus knew one thing with certainty. Cornered people rarely surrendered quietly. The courthouse looked exactly the same. The same stone steps. The same brass doors. The same American flag swaying gently in the morning breeze. Yet, to Vanessa, everything felt different. 3 years earlier, she had climbed those steps believing truth would naturally win. She had learned the hard way that truth and justice were not always the same thing. Truth existed. Justice had to be pursued. She paused at the bottom step. Marcus stopped beside her. Nervous? She smiled faintly. I've been nervous for 3 years. He nodded. So have I. Benjamin joined them. So has everyone who finally knows the truth. News crews had already gathered outside. Camera operators adjusted tripods. Reporters rehearsed opening lines. Word had spread quickly. Death row conviction under emergency review. People filled the courthouse steps. Some had come out of curiosity. Others because they remembered the original trial. A few simply believed that if someone innocent had spent 3 years waiting to die, they wanted to witness the day that wrong was finally confronted. Vanessa ignored every microphone extended toward her. She wasn't interested in interviews. She wanted her husband. Inside, Daniel Brooks sat in a holding room beneath the courthouse. He wore the same suit he had worn during his final appeal hearing. It hung more loosely now. 3 years on death row had changed him. His shoulders were thinner. His hair carried streaks of grey. His face showed lines that hadn't existed before. Yet one thing remained unchanged. His eyes. They still held the quiet kindness Vanessa had first noticed in the county library 13 years earlier. A bailiff opened the door. It's time. Daniel stood slowly. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, not to pray, to remember. His father's workshop, his mother's laughter, the first rainy afternoon with Vanessa, the smell of fresh cedar, cold coffee, stolen French fries, ordinary memories, the ones that reminded him who he was before prison tried to redefine him. Then he walked into the courtroom. Every seat was occupied. Reporters filled the back rows. Law students squeezed into the gallery. Retired police officers quietly watched from one side. Mrs. Carter sat beside Benjamin and Sarah. When Daniel entered, the room became silent. Vanessa turned. Their eyes met. Neither smiled immediately. Neither waved. They simply looked at one another. After 3 years, no words were large enough. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. Please be seated. The courtroom obeyed. She looked around the room before speaking. We are here today because substantial new evidence has been presented regarding the conviction of Daniel Brooks. Her voice remained calm, measured, professional. As officers of the court, our obligation is not to defend past decisions. It is to pursue justice wherever the evidence leads. Vanessa felt tears gathering. Those words mattered, not because they favored Daniel, because they honored the truth. District Attorney Helen Foster stood. 3 years earlier, she had stood in almost the same place, asking the jury to sentence Daniel to death. Today, her voice carried a different weight. Your Honor, the state moves to vacate the conviction of Daniel Brooks. A wave of whispers swept across the courtroom. Helen continued. Recent forensic analysis has established that Mr. Brooks's warehouse attendant's signature was forged. She held up the expert report. The handwriting is highly consistent with former employee Ethan Calloway. She placed it before the judge. The state further acknowledges that significant exculpatory evidence was never presented during the original trial. Marcus quietly lowered his head. This wasn't victory, it was accountability. Helen continued presenting the evidence. The broken security camera, the hidden notebook, the financial ledger, Michael Rhodes' letter, Ethan's recorded confession, the undisclosed crime scene photographs. Each new piece dismantled another part of the case. Not dramatically, methodically. Truth rarely shouted. It simply refused to disappear. Educational value often begins with humility. One of the greatest strengths a person can possess is the willingness to admit they were wrong. Admitting a mistake is not weakness. It is integrity. Whether in a courtroom, a workplace, or a family, the courage to correct an error often prevents far greater harm than pretending perfection. Real justice depends not on never making mistakes, but on having the honesty to correct them when they are discovered. Marcus rose. Your Honor. I would like to call one final witness. Judge Whitmore nodded. Proceed. Marcus looked toward the gallery. Mrs. Vanessa Brooks. Vanessa hadn't expected it. She looked at Marcus in surprise. He smiled reassuringly. Please. She slowly walked to the witness stand. The courtroom watched quietly. She took the oath, then sat. Marcus approached gently. Mrs. Brooks, how long have you been married to Daniel Brooks? 13 years. And during those 13 years, what kind of man have you known him to be? The courtroom waited. Vanessa smiled through tears. He notices things. A few people looked confused. Marcus didn't interrupt. He notices when someone's pretending they're all right. He notices when neighbors stop opening their curtains. He notices crooked picture frames. He notices lonely people. She laughed softly. He even notices when I've had a difficult day before I say a single word. A few smiles appeared around the courtroom. She continued. The prosecution spent 3 years telling everyone what Daniel did. She looked toward her husband. I want to tell you who he is. Silence settled over the room. He's the man who always made 2 cups of coffee, even when I slept late. He's the man who fixed my mother's porch before she had the chance to ask. He's the man who spent every Christmas morning delivering furniture to families who couldn't afford new beds. Her voice trembled. And when he discovered something wrong at that warehouse, he did exactly what he had done his entire life. He tried to protect people. She paused. He wasn't perfect. We argued. We disappointed each other. We misunderstood each other. But never. She looked directly at the judge. Never did he stop choosing what was right simply because it became difficult. Not a sound could be heard in the courtroom. Marcus asked one final question. What kept you fighting for 3 years? Vanessa looked at Daniel, then answered quietly. I remembered the man everyone else forgot. Even the reporters stopped writing. The words hung in the air. Simple, honest, powerful. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses, not because she was emotional, because she wanted to look directly at the woman whose quiet faith had carried an innocent man to this day. The courtroom sensed that history was unfolding, but one final decision still remained, and before the day ended, the truth would no longer belong only to Daniel and Vanessa. It would belong to everyone. The courtroom remained silent, not the uneasy silence that follows uncertainty, the kind that settles over a room when everyone understands they have just witnessed something profoundly human. Vanessa slowly stepped down from the witness stand. As she passed Daniel, their eyes met once more. Neither reached for the other. The rules of the courtroom still stood, but neither of them needed words. After 13 years of marriage, after 3 years of prison walls, after countless unanswered prayers, they understood each other in silence. Judge Eleanor Whitmore adjusted the papers before her. She had presided over hundreds of cases. She had sentenced violent offenders. She had comforted grieving families. She had celebrated the rare moments when justice and truth walked hand in hand. But today felt different. She looked toward District Attorney Helen Foster. Does the state wish to proceed with the conviction? Helen stood slowly. Her voice was steady. No, Your Honor. The state no longer has confidence in the conviction of Daniel Brooks. Another wave of whispers moved through the courtroom. Helen continued. Furthermore, the state recommends that Mr. Brooks be immediately released from custody while the charges are formally dismissed. Marcus quietly closed his eyes. For 3 years, he had imagined hearing those words. Judge Whitmore turned toward Marcus. Counsel? Marcus stood. Your Honor, I have nothing further to add. He looked toward Daniel. Except this. He paused. Justice delayed is painful. But justice denied forever would be unbearable. I respectfully ask this court to return an innocent man to his family. Then he sat. The judge folded her hands. She looked around the packed courtroom. Every person in this room, including this court, has been reminded of an important truth. She paused. Our justice system is built by human beings. And human beings are capable of mistakes. No courtroom honors justice by pretending those mistakes never happened. We honor justice by correcting them. She picked up her gavel. Having reviewed the newly discovered evidence, the forensic findings, the undisclosed investigative material, and the position of the state, this court hereby vacates the conviction of Daniel Brooks. She struck the gavel once. The conviction is set aside. The sentence of death is immediately nullified. Daniel Brooks, you are free. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. It was as though the entire courtroom had forgotten how to breathe. Daniel remained standing, his eyes fixed on the judge. Free. The word echoed through his mind. Free. He had imagined hearing it so many times that it no longer felt possible. The bailiff stepped forward. With trembling hands, he unlocked the handcuffs around Daniel's wrists. The metallic click echoed across the silent courtroom. 3 years of chains, ended by one simple sound. Daniel rubbed his wrists without saying a word. Then, very slowly, he turned toward Vanessa. She was already crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet tears of someone who had spent too many years being strong. Daniel walked toward her. Every step felt unreal. When he finally stood in front of her, neither spoke. She simply placed both hands against his face. I told you, she whispered. I was coming home with you. Daniel smiled through tears. You kept your promise. So did you. I almost didn't. But you did. He rested his forehead gently against hers. I never stopped believing in us. Vanessa laughed softly. There were days I stopped believing in tomorrow. She looked into his eyes. But I never stopped believing in you. At last, they embraced, not as people rescued by a miracle, but as two ordinary people who had refused to let fear define the ending of their story. The courtroom erupted into applause. Benjamin Rhodes slowly walked toward Daniel. For a moment, neither man knew what to say. Finally, Benjamin extended his hand. Daniel looked at it. Instead of shaking it, he embraced him. Benjamin broke down. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I blamed you. I hated you. I wanted you to die. Daniel held him firmly. You lost your brother. You were grieving. Benjamin shook his head. That isn't an excuse. No, Daniel replied gently. But grief makes people see the world through broken glass. Benjamin wiped away his tears. My brother believed in you. Daniel smiled. I know. I wish I'd believed him too. Sarah Calloway quietly approached. I'm sorry my brother waited too long. Daniel looked at her kindly. He was afraid. She nodded. So was I. Daniel smiled. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about finally deciding that the truth matters more. Sarah cried openly. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of silence beginning to lift. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Whitmore remained seated for several moments after the applause faded. She looked toward Daniel, then toward Vanessa. Finally, she slowly removed her robe's reading glasses and laid them on the bench. The courtroom gradually became quiet again. She stood, not as a symbol of taking sides, not as a judge favoring one person over another. She stood to honor something larger than the case itself. She stood in respect for extraordinary courage. For a wife who had refused to abandon truth when it would have been easier to surrender. For a husband who had endured unimaginable injustice without allowing bitterness to consume him. Seeing the judge rise, everyone else instinctively stood as well. The attorneys, the court staff, the bailiffs, the reporters, the spectators, one by one. The entire courtroom rose to its feet. No one had instructed them to do so. Respect needed no invitation. Judge Whitmore looked directly at Vanessa. "Mrs. Brooks." Her voice carried through the silent courtroom. "You reminded this court that justice is strongest when ordinary people refuse to give up on the truth. You have this court's deepest respect." Vanessa lowered her head, overwhelmed. She hadn't fought for recognition. She had fought for her husband. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun had finally broken through the clouds. News cameras captured Daniel and Vanessa walking down the courthouse steps together. Questions flew from every direction. "Daniel, how do you feel?" "Vanessa, what kept you going? What happens next?" Daniel smiled and looked at Vanessa before answering. "We're going home." Nothing more, nothing less. Because home wasn't a place. It was the person standing beside him. Months later, Daniel returned to his woodworking shop. The dust had been cleaned away. Sunlight poured through the windows once again. He picked up his old handplane. It felt familiar, comforting. Vanessa stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one. He took a sip, then laughed. "It's cold." She grinned. "I know. I forgot about it." He smiled. "Some habits never change." She slipped her hand into his. "No, they don't." Together, they hung one final frame on the workshop wall. Inside was the old photograph from the lake. The blurred figure remained in the background. Vanessa looked at it thoughtfully. "I used to think this picture was about the mystery." Daniel smiled. "What do you think now?" She leaned against him. "I think it's about perspective. We spent years looking at the wrong person, instead of appreciating the 2 people who were already standing together." Daniel kissed her forehead. "I like that version better." "So do I." Epilogue, the lesson that remained. People often believe that love is tested by grand romantic gestures, but life rarely asks for those. Instead, it asks whether we'll listen before judging, whether we'll seek truth instead of easy answers, whether we'll stand beside the people we love when the road becomes unbearably difficult. Memories are precious, but they are imperfect. That is why wisdom requires humility. We must be willing to question our assumptions, admit when we are wrong, and pursue truth with compassion rather than certainty. Daniel Brooks lost 3 years. Vanessa carried more sorrow than anyone should. Benjamin lived with regret. Sarah lived with fear. Yet none of them allowed pain to become the final chapter of their lives. Because forgiveness did not erase the past. Truth did not remove every scar. Justice did not return the years that had been stolen. But together, they made something stronger than revenge. They made peace. And sometimes, the greatest love story isn't about 2 people who never fall apart. It's about 2 people who keep choosing each other after the world has given them every reason not to. What an incredible journey we've shared together. Now, I want to ask you something. Do you believe you would have fought for the person you love the way Vanessa fought for Daniel? Or would you have given up when the evidence and the whole world said they were guilty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read your comments every day, and I'd love to know what lesson touched your heart the most. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable love story filled with powerful life lessons, hope, and emotional moments. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that love, truth, and perseverance still matter, share this story with them. You never know whose heart it might encourage. Remember, real love isn't proven when life is easy. It's revealed when choosing someone becomes the hardest decision you'll ever make. And sometimes, the quiet courage of one faithful heart can change a life, and even rewrite history. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. God bless you.